Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro made his first statement before a New York court after his kidnapping amidst a military aggression by the United States on Venezuelan territory. The Venezuelan leader declared, "I am the president of Venezuela and I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas. I am not guilty. I am a decent man. I'm still the president of my country," he told the judge, rejecting the charges against him. In November 2025, the Venezuelan government rejected the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's maneuver to designate the non-existent Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization. According to Caracas, the strategy sought to perpetuate an infamous and vile lie to justify an illegitimate and illegal intervention against Venezuela in the classic U.S. style of regime change. The Cartel de los Soles is not mentioned once in the annual National Drug Threat Assessment from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, nor in the annual World Drug Report of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And on Monday, the United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting requested by Venezuela following the attack perpetrated by U.S. military forces against the sovereignty of the Bolivarian territory on January 3rd and the kidnapping of President Nicolás Maduro and the first combatant Cilia Flores. At the Security Council meeting, representatives of the international community denounced the United States' illegal actions as a direct threat to world peace and security. In this scenario, several countries have condemned the military operation against Venezuela and described it as a blatant use of force that violates regulations established by international law. The United Nations meeting took place against the backdrop of international protest demanding the release of President Nicolás Maduro and first combatant Cilia Flores, as well as an end to the escalation of interferential aggressions that the U.S. government has sustained against the Latin American and Caribbean region. The Chinese government reaffirms its firm stance against the U.S. attacks in Venezuela and demands the immediate release of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. According to teleSUR, which consulted spokesperson Mao Ning, China is committed to cooperating with the international community to protect Venezuelan sovereignty and world peace. From Beijing, our correspondent Bruno Falchi brings us more details.
Hello, comrades. I am in the Chinese capital now to inform you that yesterday the United Nations Security Council convened in an emergency meeting to address the United States' illegal military actions against Venezuela, including the detention and kidnapping of the President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. During the sessions, the vast majority of the countries condemned the action and reaffirmed their support for Venezuela's sovereignty. Today, teleSUR asked the Chinese government spokesperson Mao Ning how China plans to cooperate with other member states and the international community to protect Venezuela's sovereignty and security, considering that other countries in the region, such as Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico, could also be subject to pressure or intervention, and what measures China considers effective to prevent the United States from acting as the world sheriff. Mao Ning responded to us.
昨天，联合国安理会就美国对委内瑞拉发动军事打击召开了紧急会议。
Yesterday, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency meeting on the U.S. military attack against Venezuela. In his statement, the Chinese representative emphasized that military means are not the solution to resolving problems and that the misuse of force will only lead to greater crisis. China firmly supports the Venezuelan government and people in safeguarding their sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests. China also firmly supports the countries of the region in maintaining Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. China is ready to work with the countries of the region and the international community to jointly maintain peace and stability in Latin America and the Caribbean. China has always maintained that all countries should respect the right of other nations to independently choose their own path of development and adhere to international law and the purposes of principles of the UN Charter. Major powers in particular should set an example. No country can act as the world policeman, nor it can proclaim itself as international judge. China promotes a vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, respecting the sovereignty and international integrity of all states, taking seriously the legitimate security concerns of all countries, and insisting on resolving disputes and differences between nations.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro made his first statement before a New York court after his kidnapping amidst a military aggression by the United States on Venezuelan territory. The Venezuelan leader declared, "I am the president of Venezuela and I consider myself a prisoner of war." Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro made his first statement before a New York court after his kidnapping amidst a military aggression by the United States on Venezuelan territory. In November 2025, the Venezuelan government rejected the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's maneuver to designate the non-existent Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization. According to Caracas, the strategy on Monday, the United Nations Security Council held an emergency. The Chinese government reaffirms its firms. The installation session of the Venezuelan parliament for the 2026-2031 legislative period took place on Monday with the incorporation of the deputies chosen in the elections held in May 2025. The National Assembly sworn in its members and appointed its new board of directors, which will be responsible for conducting legislative work over the next 5 years. The session was chaired by Deputy Fernando Soto Rojas, who emphasized the complexity facing the country due to the military aggression perpetrated by the United States on January 3rd and the kidnapping of constitutional President Nicolás Maduro. In this regard, several deputies. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro made his first statement before a New York court after his kidnapping amidst a military aggression by the United States on Venezuelan territory. The Venezuelan leader declared, "I am the president of Venezuela and I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in November 2020. On Monday, the United Nations, the Chinese government reaffirms its the installation session of the Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in on Monday as acting president of the Bolivarian nation. The ceremony took place before the new elected National Assembly, where Rodriguez was sworn in by the Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez. During this ceremony, the Bolivarian leader pledged full respect to the Constitution and to fulfill her duties in defense and on behalf of the people of Venezuela. She also reiterated to continue efforts for the safe return of the constitutional president, Nicolás Maduro, who was kidnapped by the United States last Saturday. In this scenario, Delcy Rodriguez called for national unity in the face of the complex situation facing the nation due to the U.S. military attack on January 3rd and the kidnapping of President Nicolás Maduro. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro made his first